why would they do this? Who would do this? So one of the biggest reasons was obviously to kick the war machine into high gear, right? If you know about the strategy and forces and resources for a new century, the report from the project for the new American century that was headed by like Jeb Bush, Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, and a bunch of neoconservatives, which they look exactly the same as neoliberals these days anyway. They met in 2000 and they had a meeting, and this is a fact. In that meeting they said that absent another Pearl Harbor, America's continued domination was going to take a very long time. And so, in my opinion, and I'm entitled to it, they went about creating another Pearl Harbor, because you all know that Pearl Harbor was just another false flag too, right? Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Checho, and today I am excited to be bringing you the much anticipated, long-awaited part 2 of my Impossible Truth About 9/11 series. I am very excited. I'm a little overwhelmed, of course, as usual, trying to put all this information together and then choosing what you guys should, in my opinion, see and must see, and where to start, where to end. But I've got it as far as I'm comfortable as getting it, and I'm bringing it to you because the time is now. September fast approaches. Anyway, where to begin? God, I must begin. I'm not deliberately beginning with the sensational, although what I'm going to begin with is sensational. It isn't something I think many people would have been able to believe just a few years ago. Some people who have been in the know about this technology may, but either way, it must be presented because there are some incontrovertible and very, very incredible facts that are surrounding this that you have to see so that you know that this is absolutely valid. And while the answer is going to be my opinion, what I can tell you absolutely is what we can conclude with what I'm going to show you. So I want to begin with, since I started doing this research, I found Dr. Judy Wood. Her work was recommended to me, and it really is groundbreaking in a lot of ways. It takes into account some things that they really would rather you not look at. And she uses an incredible term that she coined it. It's called dustification, because as she says in her presentations, there's no term for what we saw, right? And what I love about her is she begins her presentation, she talks about how, if you never look at the problem, the actual problem, it's impossible to solve. So they're propping up a theory to determine what happened before they even know the actual problem. And she's always insisting we have to start with what happened. We collect data, and data will always tell you what has actually happened. And from that, you can determine how it happened. But first, you have to establish what happened before you can determine how. And if you don't know what it is, it's very, very difficult to determine how it happened. And you're going to see exactly why that is a very, very insightful and profound statement when looking at events that are happening these days, because the technology they have been sitting on, folks, is right out of Star Trek. I mean, it's really, really, really right out of Star Trek, Star Wars. That's what they're sitting on. And if you follow me and watch me and listen to me ranting and raving, then you know that I've been saying this for a long time now. But I want to begin with this, my very, very strong opinion based on my extensive research. Now, this could not have been solely a controlled demolition, period. And I'm going to show you why. I bought into the controlled demolition theory because it seemed so obvious, and because there was nano thermite found. And so let me just say this. All I know for sure is that it was not solely controlled demolition, that it could not have been. And I'm going to show you why I make that statement very, very firmly, and I stand behind it. What I'm not ruling out is the use of nanothermite, because in my opinion, when you're going to pull something like this off, then you have redundancy plan after redundancy plan after redundancy plan in place, particularly if you're dealing with new and technology that is slightly less predictable and as you would like, but effective. Bear with me, I'm going to show you what I mean. So, the towers didn't collapse. They literally turned to dust in midair. What we saw was the beginning of a collapse. But we didn't actually witness a collapse because the dust cloud that raised to the sky was big enough to block out the sun. And anybody who was there will tell you that. And the towers did not slam to the ground. They didn't hit the ground. Something that collapses has to hit the ground. You're talking about 1,250,000 tons of debris piled on the ground if they had actually collapsed or been demolished in a controlled demolition. And I'm going to show you that literally, physically, absolutely did not happen. No questions asked. So let me show you what I mean. We're also going to talk about how the fact that the towers were built in a dike. They were built in the Hudson. That's how deep down they were. And if you slam 1 million tons of debris into a dike, it's going to break. Obviously, it's going to break. And that didn't happen. The seismic recordings, there was 5 sensors recording at the time, would have shown a collapse of a controlled demolition. Now, let me show you. Let me back up what I'm saying with some of the actual readings that were taken, so you can see if I can successfully share my screen.
This is an earthquake that happened earlier that year, in January of 2001.
That's Dr. Judy Wood.
In Manhattan. So we know that the bedrock that the tower sat on can carry a seismic signal. But here's what Tower 1, the signal it made. Notice the difference in the quality. This is very high frequency. The lines are very closely spaced compared to this. Also, it has this, I call it the snout leading up to the big signal. It has that leading portion, which is the primary wave. The P wave arrives first, and then the secondary wave arrives. This is neither a P wave or an S wave. This is only a surface wave. P wave and S wave travels through the Earth. In other words, during the tower's demise, the signal did not travel through the Earth. Again, that's the January 17th earthquake. And here's...
Okay, so since that wasn't...
P wave is like a rubber band snap, and the S wave is like a jump rope. And the rolling surface, like getting up off a mattress in the morning, the mattress springs back up. If you remove 2 500,000-ton buildings, you're going to create a surface wave. But it only lasted 8 seconds. You know, it takes 9.5 seconds to throw a bowling ball off the roof of the towers and have it hit the ground. So how can this be? The building couldn't have reached the ground
That's the only way.
as a solid, rigid object.
Now, wait, there's part 2 of that. Just so you know that, just so you know that these are legitimate readings taken, and that physically this is impossible. If what we were told happened, even the conspiracy theory of controlled demolition, even if that was true, if the narrative that they're selling us about the pancake collapse was true, then they would have registered, among other things. If the conspiracy theory of controlled demolition that Richard Gage loves touting everywhere, that I believe he has been put in charge of touting for the government, to misdirect you from this, if that was true, then you would have this register on the seismic scale, okay? I'm going to show you that it didn't, and that's impossible.
This is the King Dome. So here's a controlled demolition, and it produces a P wave and an S wave. So what length of time does that take? It takes, for a free fall speed from the roof to the ground, it's about 4 seconds. But the portion of time that the ground shook was more than twice that. So that doesn't answer the question either of what we saw. And with Building 7, what is very telling is that they calculated when the P wave and the S wave should have arrived, because they could not pick it out from background noise. They couldn't even pick out where the surface wave arrived at one of these stations. So there's 5 different stations reporting, and they had to calculate when the S wave and P wave would have arrived, and it was not there. The signal did not travel through the earth.
Wow.
So if we have Seattle King Dome, we're going to look at things relative to that. That made a 2.3 on the Richter scale when it was blown up by controlled demolition. And we have these 2 towers. Let's say for the Tower 2 was the first to go. So if we turn it to dust, all but the bottom 16 stories, and then drop a 16-story building to the ground, we record approximately the same seismic signal as what was recorded on 9/11. Just pretend this rest doesn't exist. And for Tower 2, if you turn it into dust above the 20th story and just drop a 20-story building to the ground, you get the seismic signal that was recorded. And for Building 7, it's all but the bottom 2.5 stories.
Wow.
Where's the rest of the building? Makes it 0.6 on the Richter scale. That's like a jackhammer.
That's nothing.
It should have sounded like it was raining dump trucks. You know, big dump trucks go down the road, they wake you up at night because they vibrate the ground.
Listen, guys, do you understand what she just said? Do you understand the impossibility of we've never seen anything like this. At least we had not until that day. How do you make almost 100 stories disintegrate before it hits the ground? That is some serious technology. Okay, it's scary. It's really scary. Okay, now I want to show you guys something that blew my mind. Okay, I was struck when I was revisiting some of this work, and I saw these pictures that were taken outside of the World Trade Center. And they weren't taken right at ground zero, but they were taken sometimes a block, 2 blocks away. And they were taken of the street. And I'm going to show you the pictures, I'm going to show you the video, and then I'm going to show you some other pictures that I collected that I think are highly, interesting. Let's call them. You'll be able to see what the correlation I've made is, and I think you'll be able to ascertain and make some of your own, or not. But all I can do is show you, and I have this part labeled, where have we seen this phenomenon before? So I want to share my video with you again so you could see what was found, and you'll see the news footage to prove that this was legit. And then I'm going to show you some pictures I collected, and you tell me if it's any indication of what may or may not have been used on that day.
This was the day after 9/11. Peter Jennings in the studio.
This is down in Lower Manhattan today, George. I don't know if you heard a little earlier me raise this question, which was actually raised by ABC's Jackie Judd as we look at these areas down below. And the video where the towers used to stand, and where is all the rubble gone? And have you been able to, is there any way you can answer that question?
I'm sorry, Peter, I didn't get the question.
Okay, I apologize. Jackie Judd and several other people keep asking us, when you look at where the towers used to stand, there is surprisingly so little rubble. Where did all the rubble go?
It's a very good question, Peter, and I have asked some people who've been doing some of the rescue and recovery work this morning. If you look behind me, you can see the very remains, the skeletal remains of the World Trade Center. And one volunteer, Robert Gerlinski, explained to me the reason there's so little rubble is that all of it simply fell down into the ground and was pulverized, evaporated.
What? That's not...
This is vital information. I really feel for George Stephanopoulos. He's got this job telling the world what's going on there, and that's the best he could do. And we humans tend to keep asking questions until we're given an answer. We don't stop to think if the answer makes sense. So what he is telling us is that it's obvious there's a big lack of material there.
Okay, so I just realized that was not the clip I meant to show you, but absolutely relevant because I was just showing you how the buildings disappeared. So it works out perfectly because there was no debris. Where did the debris go? You cannot unload 1 million tons of debris overnight. It's impossible. And everyone had the same question in the morning. Where, oh where did the towers go? Aha, I found it. So this is the clip I meant to show you. Now, you tell me, where have we seen this phenomenon before?
And you said you saw melted tour buses, melted cars?
The cars that were right down there, it was just unbelievable. They were twisted and melted into nothing. The debris is just unbelievable. And then you can see fire trucks and police vehicles that were down there early that all their windows, the windshields are completely blown out must have been from when debris dropped.
But even more jarring, I think, is this scene right here. Look at these two cars placed on top of one another. I think when you think about the impact that these planes must have had, it's hard to visualize.
I don't know what to say.
Because everything melted. But here, at least you have some remnants. You have literally an engine.
What?
That is melded together with other parts of the car. Moving over, you've got another car they moved here. It looks like it's been through a war. You can see the papers, all the burned out papers from the building. You see the soot and the dirt, and it just shows you how devastating this blast was. Look across the street there. You've got
Look at this.
a Con Ed truck that, some of the Con Ed people now looking at, examining, trying to figure out which truck that actually was. But that truck, too, in terrible shape. So while many of the items, the steel was literally melted.
People who have been right down next to the base of what was the trade towers say there's virtually nothing.
Yes, we'll stop here on this toasted bus picture. Realize there's no burnt marks, no scorch marks. The toasted bus. But yeah, these poor reporters, they're doing the best they can. Remember, the evidence is the truth. that a theory must mimic if a theory is correct. Starting out with a theory, if you haven't figured out what happened first, you're just solving an imagined problem, not a real problem. So it's so important to look at the evidence. As we've seen, the evidence is showing us a different story than what we were led to believe. Now this toasted bus, notice there's no big flame marks running up beside the bus. No scorch marks. This is echoing. Oh. And then we have also this vehicle that's already rusted. You can see Building 7 is still standing.
Look at that.
Every car
Building
up this
7 is
road
still that was
toasted
taken
in some way.
in the middle
Every vehicle.
of the day
I call
in
this the
9/11,
swamp.
before
I think
Building
you can
7
see
came
why.
down. There is no
Is it the
explanation
sound?
for how a fire would have gotten down there. Do you
No
understand?
door handles.
Impossible.
Not
Impossible.
a trace of window glass.
Do you think the flames billowed? No, there's no billowing of flames. They're not.
3, 2. Oh man!
They're like a block and a
Debris
half
falling
from
a
the
nearby
top.
building, the World Trade Center. We're at West Broadway and Barclay. Very difficult to breathe here, but look around. This must have been ground zero where this thing blew up. Car after car after car, buses
What?
completely obliterated and burned straight down to the steel. Behind me,
He was describing it the best he could. Here's more of that street. And notice no door handles. Now that in itself isn't surprising, but we're just noticing the patterns. It seems that door latches, trunk lid latch, this door, door latches and door handles were completely gone. Also, this looks like it was sandblasted, ready for a new paint job. Not a trace of window glass left in that. And that's what seems to be a trend with the toasted vehicles. Something happens to the engine compartment too, like this one down here. And notice again this distinct abrupt line between different parts of the car. Now, often folks say, well, that's just like any old burnt car. Here are burnt cars up at the top. Notice these rings of burn marks around it. And burnt cars also have remains of window glass. This is clean down here. And here we have traces of window glass left. And of course, there's a lot left there. But the ones on 9/11, there's not a trace. The ones that are seriously toasted. Doesn't look at all. These are uniform colors, like they've been sandblasted, ready for a new paint job. And insides are completely toasted. I think they threw this stuff in afterwards. But the stuffing is still partly here in the burnout car. So there's a bunch of cars that appear to go into spontaneous combustion up in that parking lot.
Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everything is working now. This technology is glitching on me. Maybe it's because of what I'm talking about. I just was kicked off and it stopped recording again. Hopefully you saw those pictures that I was showing you that relate to the World Trade. I took those pictures from Maui and also California. And I remember seeing them for the first time when I saw the pictures of the World Trade Center, those toasted cars and the buses and the mangled metal. And I thought I was looking at pictures of Maui. And I was like, holy shit. Toasted cars. Now, so all these light bulbs went off in my mind. And then I started looking at pictures from California, Australia, Chile. And they all have a lot in common. And I'm still in awe of it. But what can do that to a car? I mean, a fire can't pick up a car and smash it on its head like that. That's not how fires work. What world are we living in where we believe these kind of impossible physics? So, let's get into we just saw a lot of pictures of, well, first we saw a lot of pictures of cars completely mangled and melted, and then we saw pictures of Maui where it's there, like there was things melted next to things that weren't melted, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And then we saw pictures of California where there's trees right next to the melted cars, and if you're like me, you're scratching your head wondering how in God's name the kindling survived and the metal didn't. So let's go over some facts about steel and talk about fires, because this is very, very relevant to know. Okay, hopefully my recording stays going, God willing. Thank you, God. Let's set the record straight. Steel melts at a temperature of 2,750 degrees Fahrenheit and above. And that's it. Okay? These temperatures are attained only in a blast furnace, or you would need a very powerful incendiary device such as thermite, or some kind of radiation device. Okay. Example. An open air hydrocarbon fire reaches a maximum temperature of some 1,200 degrees. That's Fahrenheit, and that's in a dirty, or what they would call an uncontrolled burn. That's a typical campfire, with those beautiful orange flames that are so mesmerizing that we love. That's a typical orange fire. And we did see some of those flames. We saw those red and orange flames when the planes went poof, because the fireball caused by the kerosene, the jet fuel, that was orange, and that itself is over 1,000 degrees too cold to melt steel. Do you understand? That's a fact. That's physics. Okay. Now, FEMA has officially reported that the jet fuel from the planes would have burned off in the immediate explosion. How they say that and then put forth their theories is another question that I don't have the answers to, because obviously they were hired to lie. So the myth of this jet fuel running down the towers and causing it to get just hot enough to crink a little bit and then cause a full-scale free fall speed collapse, I hope that is becoming as nonsensical to your ears as it has become to mine, because it is completely against the laws of physics. It makes absolutely no sense. There is no scenario where that happens. And that's not even put in, given the fact that these towers were built the way they were built, which was incredibly well. All right. So we're going to talk about the many, many reports of the basement level explosions. Not jet fuel dripping down into elevator shafts 100 stories down and all that nonsense we've been sold, but the shockwave from the plane was 90 stories above. Yet I've seen dozens of eyewitness testimony of New Yorkers talking about how the bombs were going off on the subway in the basement before the second plane hit. You had people reporting bombs going off in Building 7 all day, starting in the morning before any planes were hit. And I have testimony from that too. There was 108 documented testimonies of explosions from first responders alone, all of which it took a court order, of course, to be released. Now, why would they hide those? Why would you need a court order to release testimony such as that? Who put that under lock and key? In early 2008, we're going to get into that, but okay, so that's steel. So when you're looking at these pictures, when you're looking at pictures of fire, now you have I've given you a reminder, if you don't already know, about what an orange fire looks like, and how that is typically going to be about 1,200 degrees, which is over 1,000 degrees too cold. Not 100, not 500, but over 1,000 degrees too cold to melt steel. Okay? Let alone disintegrate it. Right. So I thought it was very, very good that we go over that. And you know, I should also remind you that there's only been 3 recorded cases of an office fire bringing down a skyscraper in the history of mankind. And those 3 buildings were on 9/11. And just so you understand how impossible it is what they've been telling us, I have a little video about it. I don't want to go into it because I feel like everybody should. I mean, is this really still a question mark? This should be the most obvious part of anybody looking into this. All right, I'm going to share my screen and just show you real quick. And this is going to run down the buildings and the steel. But I will talk about the construction of the World Trade because it is a marvel, and I respect it so much because they built it so well. They built it to withstand any airplane, anything they could hit it with. There's nothing that was going to topple that. I'm going to show you what I mean and how that is true. That is not my opinion. That is just, I'll show you that, but let me share my screen.
It seems that high-rise fires are more common than I thought. I found hundreds of them. According to a 2011 report by the National Fire Protection Association, there are an average of 110 fires each year in buildings over 13 stories tall. According to the report, between 2005 and 2009, there were 550 high-rise fires. Of course, there are many more all throughout history, but let's talk about some of the more startling ones. Sao Paulo, Brazil. The Joelma Building, 1974. Sparked by an electrical fire, the residential building burned twice as long as the Twin Towers, yet it stood. The underlying structure wasn't even weakened. In fact, it's still in use today. The MGM Grand, which is now Bally's in Las Vegas, Nevada, caught fire in 1980, killing 85 people. It's had a few facelifts and ownership changes, but the structure underneath was never compromised. It's still in use today. Los Angeles, California, 1988. What was then called the First Interstate Bank building burned for 3.5 hours. No structural failure at all. In fact, an insurance company moved in, and today it's known as the Aon Center. In 2004, the Parque Central building in Caracas, Venezuela, the country's tallest building, burned for 17 hours. The facade was repaired, and it is in use today. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, One Meridian Plaza, 1991, burned for 18 hours. It stood. Beijing, China, the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, burned for 6 hours in 2009. It stood. Chechnya's tallest building burned for 7 hours in April 2013. It stood. Dubai, Moscow, Zurich, and on and on. I was starting to see a trend. Fires don't melt steel or cause buildings to collapse. The World Trade Center has itself burned many times with no structural failure or weakening. Some significant dates include February 13th, 1970.
So you get the point. There's only been 3 recorded cases of office fires or any fire bringing down a skyscraper in the history of mankind, and that was on 9/11. Right. That's just, I mean, hey, I'm doing a good job of not, I've heard your requests and your desire for me to use less profanity doing my specials, because many of you have expressed interest in showing your younger ones, and some of your groups and classes my videos. I've heard your request. I appreciate the feedback, and I am trying, and I'm going to do my best to refrain from using profanity, even though I get emotional and frustrated and passionate about the things that we've been lied to about. So bear with me on that. I just wanted to put that out there and let you know. So some notes of interest, okay? In early 2008, it was revealed that the CIA had destroyed all videotaped interrogations of Al-Qaeda operatives. I wonder why it did that. The 9/11 Commission leaders Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton wrote in the New York Times that the Commission had asked the CIA repeatedly for those tapes that were obtained in the interrogation. And they called the agency's failure to disclose the existence of those tapes out to begin with, they labeled it obstruction. Why would they destroy those tapes? I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions. Now, another question I get is why? Why would they do this? It blows my mind that that's not obvious to people, but I often forget the context and the amount of, craziness that I've been peeking my head into for a few years now, because it's so obvious to me. Okay, why would they do this? Who would do this? So, one of the biggest reasons was obviously to kick the war machine into high gear, right? If you know about the strategy and forces and resources for a new century, the report from the project for the new American century that was headed by like Jeb Bush, Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, and a bunch of neoconservatives, which they look exactly the same as neoliberals these days anyway. They met in 2000 and they had a meeting, and this is a fact. In that meeting they said that absent another Pearl Harbor, America's continued domination was going to take a very long time. And so, in my opinion, and I'm entitled to it, they went about creating another Pearl Harbor, because you all know that Pearl Harbor was just another false flag too, right? Or I will have to do another special on Pearl Harbor and the Lusitania. I already know. I can see that is coming. But the Patriot Act, okay? Big reason. You had Afghanistan, trillions of dollars of money laundering. We had no objective in Afghanistan. That's what the Afghan papers, you can read them, were about. They were the disclosure of the fact that we, the people who were in Afghanistan, were well aware we had no idea why we were there. The soldiers that were there, the money laundering, the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars they laundered through Afghanistan, the poppy seeds, the poppy fields. This is a George Bush specialty. George Bush Sr., George Bush Jr. by proxy. Okay, oil and poppy. Poppy Bush. That was his nickname. Not because he was a cool grandfather. His CIA nickname was Poppy, because he was in charge of the poppy fields. What do you think we stayed in Vietnam for so long for? Yeah. That'll be another special I'll have to do so I can highlight that for you. But the greatest hit our Bill of Rights has ever taken, second to none, was the Patriot Act. And they always put sweet little labels on things to make you think that one thing is the opposite of what it actually is. In the aftermath of 9/11, the corrupt Bush family was able to easily pass the already written Patriot Act, which was rebranded into the Patriot Act, in the name of terror, okay? And this would have never been justified. It would never pass because you needed outright fear to kill critical thinking entirely. And that's what they drummed up. That's what they had going for them. And just so people, it wasn't tapering off, they had their little anthrax letter scare. The terrorists are at it again, those Arab terrorists, damn them. And then it came out that the anthrax was from an American bioweapons lab, was never sent by terrorists. Very telling. Very telling. Should be very revealing to you. I bet you didn't know that those envelopes that were sent to scare everyone, and actually they killed, I think, a few people. They were really loaded with anthrax. That it then came out that they came from an American weapons lab. You didn't hear about that in the news. Why is that? I bet you remember the letters, though. Everybody remembers the letters because they served their purpose to drum fear back up. They needed to push that Patriot Act through. Other very, very interesting facts I discovered. In January of 2001, the Bush administration is documented very well, giving a blanket order to intelligence agencies to back off all investigations of the bin Laden family, including two of bin Laden's relatives who were living in Falls Church, Virginia, not far from CIA headquarters. A blanket order was given. Bin Laden has been on the most wanted list for years before 9/11. We know, and you should know, from my last part, from part one, I showed you how we had, almost a full year of advance warning that this attack was, quote, being planned. Except the people who were warning us didn't realize we were the ones planning it. So it fell on deaf ears, you know? Yeah. Sound familiar? Does that sound like anything else that's happened recently? I don't know. I mean, I seem to recall learning that Israel knew almost a year in advance of its terrorist attack as well. I know that's a very, very sensitive issue for a lot of people still in denial about what happened that day. So I won't go into it. It certainly doesn't win me any subscribers and fans. But you could kind of get a good idea of how I feel about that nonsense as well. Now, where were we? 1976. Osama bin Laden's brother, Salim bin Laden, hired a man in Texas, this is 1976 now, by the name of Jim Bath to handle all the investments he was going to make in the United States for the bin Laden family. Not coincidentally, and not surprising to many of you who have been following me long enough, Jim Bath also happens to be a personal and almost lifelong friend of former Air National Guard pilot with George W. Bush. The connections between the Bushes and the bin Ladens become clearer when documents and a paper trail show that George Herbert Walker made trips to Saudi Arabia in 1998 and 2000 to meet directly with bin Laden on behalf of a company that he was heavily involved with called the Carlyle Group. Ever heard of the Carlyle Group? You should look into them. Very, very dodgy. Very, very sketchy. NGOs, among other things. So we have a documented history with the Bushes and the bin Ladens that goes way back, my friends, way back. And it's incontrovertible because you can't hide the paper trail. Now, some more interesting facts. Marvin Pierce Bush, George's little brother, and their first cousin, Wirt Bush, were principals in charge of a company called Securicom, eventually renamed Stratesec. And that they ran security for the World Trade Center. Well, you know what? Let me show you a little clip that summarizes all that really, really well so that you can make all the connections you need to understand about who the Bush family was tied into to make all of this happen, including the bin Ladens, okay?
A December 2000 assessment of the World Trade Center recommended immediate renovation work on the steel columns contained within elevator shafts of both twin towers. Turner Construction, a company located on the 38th floor of the North Tower, was selected to do the job. Turner's CEO at the time was Tom Leppert, who had personal ties to George W. Bush and Carlos Gutierrez, Secretary of the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce is in charge of NIST, an agency that may sound familiar. Turner Construction also did fireproofing work on the very floors that were struck by Flights 11 and 175. Of course, all documents pertaining to Turner's work on the Twin Towers were destroyed on 9/11. In addition, President Bush's brother, Marvin, was on the board of directors at Securicom from 1993 until fiscal year 2000. Securicom, later known as Stratesec, was an electronic security company backed by Kuwait American Corporation, which provided security for United Airlines, Dulles International Airport, and from the early 1990s up to 9/11, the World Trade Center. According to the Port Authority, there are no records pertaining to the work that the company performed on the World Trade Center. So, a company with ties to the government agency that eventually investigated the collapse was responsible for doing renovation work inside the Twin Towers, and the building's security was run by a company with family ties to President Bush. And we have no records to prove what they did inside the buildings. Nothing suspicious here.
Nothing suspicious at all, really. Begone, conspiracy theorists! I mean, coincidence theorists. Begone. I vanquish you. This is not the world for you. Let me stop sharing my screen. What am I doing? I need to pay attention here. Oh, I did stop sharing. All right. Everything is good. Yes. Okay. Where was I? So now we have tied. I mean, so people are like, well, how will we know who did this? We know who did this by who was covering it up. We know who did this by who was ongoing, pretending like they had no idea what was happening when we know, in fact, they did. That's how we know who did this. We know who did this because we know who the people who made a spectacular fortune on 9/11, simply by knowing it was going to happen. How? They used stock put options. They used the stock market. They knew the stocks and the airlines, the insurance companies associated with 9/11 would crash. And so they used that information. They made negative bets on the stock market called put options. Okay? Put options are bets that are that a certain stock will plummet in value by a certain date. It's a big risk. It's a big gamble. Unless you've got inside information. And then it's peachy keen. It's illegal if you get caught. Put option bets on the decline in 9/11 related airline insurance stocks skyrocketed by a whopping 600% just before 9/11, which means, quite obviously, that someone knew about the attack. Who? Who knew about it? Well, Merrill Lynch, HSBC, Morgan Stanley, shocker, Bank of America, Munich, Raytheon, Lehman Brothers, General Motors, Swiss Re, Munich Re, Axel Re. Oh, by the way, they own 25% of American Airlines. All of these criminals bought insider put options through Deutsche Bank, and they profited billions and billions. While the economy took a dump, while everyone else was living in fear, they looked like Scrooge McDuck, rolling in it, baby, rolling in it. Okay, so people ask, who did it? Who did it? Who did it? I mean, to me, it couldn't be more obvious who was responsible. Who were the people in the meeting that for the new American century? Jeb Bush, Dick Cheney, all these war hawks, all these oil banking family stooges. The parasite class doing what they do best, false flagging events to create a war and marshal their resources and consolidate their power. That's what they do. Okay? So I always marvel at the question, like, who could have done this? Isn't it obvious? I mean, it is to me. Let me show you another thing, that should help you figure out who knew what was up, who knew what was happening, and who didn't. I'm sorry. This presentation is a little more video heavy than some of my other ones, but I want you to see firsthand that what I'm saying is not necessarily just my opinion, but we know what they knew now, and how they lied about what they knew. I mean, there's the fact that we knew that Building 7 was going to collapse for all day. Now, I'm going to show you something so that you know that they had knowledge that Building 7 was going to collapse, that was going to come down. Now, do you understand Building 7 could have never come down in any office fire, or even if it was hit by, a plane or whatever? Like it's impossible. So the fact that this happened tells you unequivocally, unambiguously, that the people at the highest levels knew what was going to happen. Okay? Just listen. Remember, no office fire has ever caused a skyscraper to collapse in the history of civilization. Not ever. And this is what was going on 9/11.
Lots of people, including politicians, the media, and emergency workers on the ground, knew Building 7 was going to come down well ahead of time, as impossible an event as that was.
But even then, they said, hey, you got to stay behind this line, because they're thinking about taking this building down. They're not sure if it's stable or not. So they were holding a line off because they had knowledge that something was going to happen.
That by noon or 1 o'clock, they told us we had to move from that triage site up to Pace University, a little further away, because Building 7 was going to come down or being brought down.
How? Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department. And They did use the word, we're going to have to bring it down.
The fire department's going to have to bring it down? How could they possibly bring
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down soon.
I didn't hear any creaking or I didn't hear any indication that it was going to come down. And all of a sudden, the radios exploded and everybody started screaming, get away, get away, get away from it. And the whole time you hear boom, 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 boom. So I think I know an explosion when I hear it.
We are on the phone with New York Fire Department Lieutenant David Restuccio. Can you confirm it was number 7 that just went in?
Yes, sir.
And you guys knew this was coming all day.
We had heard reports that the building was unstable and that eventually would either come down on its own,
the one that wasn't
or it would be taken down.
Why would it be unstable? Why would
we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10-15 minutes, and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management, and we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. The World Trade Center was going to collapse. It was going to collapse. It was going to collapse.
But it was the media's pre-knowledge of Building 7's fall that was much more telling. Several news outlets around the world reported the collapse of Building 7 long before it happened. I listened closely to these segments. Considering Building 7 wasn't hit by an airplane and no high-rise has ever collapsed because of fire, how was it that all these different news agencies reported it before it happened? How can anyone report there has been an improbable accident before the accident happens?
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were.
That one of the other buildings, Building 7 in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
That has structural damage as well. We saw a lot of glass broken out, and a corner of the building appeared to be in distress, and there's concern that there might actually be another collapse of that building.
We are getting word from New York right now that another building has collapsed. Is that smoke coming from this third collapse? Okay, that is what we're understanding, which makes sense because it looks like the sun is going down, but hoping that enough people have cleared out of downtown Manhattan so that perhaps it wasn't as full as it might be normally around 5:30 on a Tuesday.
That information, of course, take a look at that right-hand side of the screen.
It's going down right now.
There it is.
Yep.
Right down.
Brown building, the tall one, is number 7 World Trade Center. I've heard several reports from several different officers now that that is the building that is going to go down next.
Now, how would they know that? Why would they say that? I mean, you understand that the media, they're just puppets. They literally just say what they're told to say. People ask, why was the media at Trump's rally? It was the first one they were at. They were all there. They were all told to be there. The BBC, why do you think that is? Why else? They need their media in attendance so they could broadcast everything. I mean, they love to broadcast things that traumatize people. They love to broadcast presidents getting their heads blown off. I don't know if you remember JFK. Excuse me. Anyway. Excuse me. So I've stopped sharing my screen. Let's see. And we're still recording. This is good news. Okay. Now, I've showed you how Building 7 was pre-planned. Even though as I mentioned, no fire has ever done that before, everyone was very sure it was going to happen. And even NYPD, they were like, oh, yeah, we're going to bring that one down. Yeah, you're going to do it, buddy. What? Like, you see why I moved out of New York City? Not nearly as smart as I thought the city was. So let's talk about the fact that, well, there's the Israelis who were arrested and held for 60 days because they were caught literally like in a ecstasy of celebration on the street dancing in front of New Yorkers who are like in shock and mourning, and they made such a terrible impression that they were arrested and held in captivity. Imagine. And they were all Israelis, but they were thrilled. Now, why would Mossad agents be thrilled about what happened? Who was the biggest threat to Israel in 2000? Iraq? still Iran, Libya, right? Well, we have Bibi Netanyahu, Satanyahu, telling American Congress starting in 2000, you should absolutely preemptively strike Iraq. They should not be allowed to get nuclear weapons, nuclear arms, and they're trying. And another thing Bibi quoted saying, and I will send these clips to my editor for him to hopefully plug right in right here, saying how if you preemptively strike Iraq, the reverberations in the region will be bountiful. It'll do so much good. Now, we've seen what has happened since we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, and it is not good. It is not good at all. It's a disaster for all intents and purposes. In Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda is in charge, and we're now paying them to govern the place that we went and fought to get them out of. Iraq, no different. Completely destabilized, run by thugs and gangsters. That is America's legacy. That is our signature. That is what we have left. We went in there. Let's talk about Larry Silverstein. Lucky Larry. You've heard of Lucky Larry. Everybody knows Lucky Larry, all right? Lucky Larry came into a spectacular deal with the World Trade. I mean, nobody got luckier than this guy. Not only that, but he would then go to, he bought the World Trade that summer, came into a fabulous deal, took out massive terrorist insurance. That's coincidentally the biggest insurance plan ever taken out for terrorist insurance. And he made them pay it. And he knew about the asbestos, which is why they were giving him a deal on the buildings. He ended up only paying like a few $1 million down. He made billions off the insurance claim. Larry Silverstein. So if you want to know the fact that he knew that the buildings were going to be attacked beforehand, he had gone to work every single day before that, and he always worked on the top floor. And that day, in an interview that I have, I don't know if I want to show you. I don't want to look at his face. But he claims that he would have gone to work that day like he did every other day, but his wife called him and his wife told him that he had a dermatologist appointment and that he had to go. And she used that tone with me, he said. I mean, the lies. I mean, if you want to see a bold-faced liar, let me just show you so you can see what this man looks like as he literally bullshits his way through the answer to this question. I'm sorry, I swore again. BS's his way. I'm trying. This one's okay. I think this one is safe. I think I only swore like once. Anyway, let me show you. Let me show you this.
I wasn't where I was. Where were you on September 11th? I was home.
Lies.
And
lies.
Liar. The only reason I wasn't where I was every morning, subsequent to the 26th day of July, my mornings were spent usually at a breakfast meeting at Windows, an 8 o'clock breakfast meeting, Windows, the top of it, right? And then going down to visit with my tenants, my new tenants, at the Trade Center, getting to know them, understanding their problems and so forth, ascertaining how we could service their needs better. Which is one of the first things you do when you acquire a property. Begin to meet your tenants and start talking with them. And so my mornings were spent at the Trade Center, and then by noon I was back uptown. And so that particular morning, because I have light-colored hair and fair skin, and I'm an annuity to the dermatologist, my wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor. And I remember dressing to go to the doctor. I'm finally saying to my wife, I said, sweetheart, I've got so much to do downtown. I got to cancel this. I've got to go downtown. And she said, you're not going to cancel this appointment. You're going to the dermatologist. And, having been married now to the same woman for 46 years, you get this sense of determination on occasion, their voices. And I said, okay, yes, dear, I'll go. And then just minutes later, received a telephone call to turn on a television set and witnessed this horrendous
forced him to go to the dermatologist.
First plane hitting, and the second plane hitting, of course, with the second
to know the name of that dermatologist.
It became obvious that this was terrorism.
I would love to confirm disappointment. I guarantee you there's no confirming disappointment. Do you believe a word of that? That is nonsense. How many coincidences do you need to realize the wool has been pulled over our eyes? How many coincidences is it going to take? That's my question. Did I stop sharing my screen? Yes, I did. Yay. Okay. So there was the matter of the asbestos, which is incredible because they allowed so many people to work in that toxic environment. And they knew that the World Trade Center had been declared unusable. And they were running out of time. And it would have cost way too much money to remove the asbestos. No one wants to remove asbestos. It was actually going to be less costly to build 2 new towers than remove all the asbestos and redo the entire interior of the 110-story building. And they know that because a few floors, almost bankrupted themselves trying to remove the asbestos to get ahead of it. Ended up costing them almost like $100 million. Anyway, the towers, it would have cost massive amount of money to get rid of all that poison. So Larry made a purchase, and what ended up happening, because you cannot bring down buildings that have asbestos in them in controlled demolitions. It would be illegal. It would be toxic. So the fact that they knew that, the fact that they then brought these buildings down anyway, the fact that they then let people work in these asbestos-ridden conditions for months without protective breathing apparatus is a crime. It's a crime. Make no mistake about it. Call it for what it is. It's criminal. It's criminal negligence. It's terrible. And it makes me so angry. So there's that. I want to talk to you guys about one more thing. I may have to have a part 3. This is crazy. I have so much information I want to share. If you guys want me to have a part 3, then you got to let me know in the comments. You got to tell me you want me to keep going and keep expanding on this from part 1 to part 2 to part 3. Let me know in the comments. And if you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you're listening on audio, I thank you for being a listener, and I would be even more grateful if you could drop us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify and write us a review if you enjoy this podcast. They go a long way, and I'm grateful for all of them. So, God, there's so many things I want to tell you about. Do I dare get into the phone calls? I haven't even touched Flight 93. I touched the Pentagon a little bit, but so I just had a podcast with Adam Eisenberg, who was boots on the ground at the Pentagon when the plane was hit. He's a first responder. He was there on scene. And he'll tell you the same thing that you can probably notice with your own eyes. There was no plane parts. There was no plane. Whatever hit the Pentagon wasn't a plane. Maybe it was a souped-up drone. Maybe it was a missile. It certainly wasn't a plane, Flight 93, we can get into that. But I may save that for part 3. The cell phone calls, this is a big one. People are like, what about the cell phone calls? Operation Northwoods, my friends. This is you got to remember that this plan was first designed way back in Kennedy's time. Literally, the government created in Operation Northwoods. They had a plan to hijack airplanes and crash them and blame a certain country in order to invade it. This is an old playbook that they brought. They dusted off for 9/11. Literally, you can read Operation Northwoods. You can look up the documents. They're out in the public. Okay, you can read about how this plan was formulated and see how it was executed on this day. Part of that plan. The phone calls. Everyone remembers the phone calls. First of all, most of those phone calls were never run down. But let me just summarize the phone calls and this nonsense for you so we can put that to bed. I won't have to do that for part 3. All right? I'm going to share my screen one more time because I found a clip that really encapsulates everything you need to understand about the phone calls.
Third with a bomb strapped to his waist with a red belt, were preparing to take control of the flight. Jefferson estimated that she spoke to Beamer for 7 minutes before the 2 hijackers armed with knives entered the cockpit. This places the hijacking at around 9:52, while officially it took place at 9:28. This is no small discrepancy. How could Beamer be describing events that are supposed to be happening in front of his eyes when in fact they had already happened half an hour before? How could the terrorists be preparing to take control of the flight at 9:45 when they had already been in the cockpit for more than 15 minutes? The FBI also wrote that Jefferson noted that the call had an unusually low amount of background noise, the same thing Liz Glick had noticed. Furthermore, the records show that Beamer's call lasted roughly 1 hour and that the line was left open after the crash. We didn't lose a connection, stated Jefferson, because there's a different sound that you use. I never lost connection. It just went silent. Jefferson stayed on the phone, stated the FBI, until she learned Flight 93 had crashed. Question. Since airphones are powered by the same airplane's electrical system, how could the line have remained open for another 45 minutes after the plane had literally disintegrated to the ground in 1,000 pieces? All these discrepancies seem to suggest that Beamer was not on the plane, observing real events unfolding, but was describing an imaginary, pre-scripted situation from a different location. In support of this hypothesis, we also have the dramatic message left by flight attendant Cece Lyles in her husband's answering machine before briefly talking to him on her cell phone. As she herself is suggesting, we should listen very carefully.
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that.
We too can notice the absence of the typical background noise heard inside a plane.
I don't know what to say. There's 3 guys. They've hijacked the plane. I'm trying to be calm.
After saying goodbye, she seems to fumble with the headset while she whispers a few more words into the mouthpiece.
I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
End of message.
You hear that?
Even by playing the segment several times, it remains difficult to hear anything different from the words, "It's a frame." In any case, the problem with the phone calls does not change. The cell phone calls confirmed by the FBI in their reports cannot have been made from the cruising airplanes. Someone has to explain where they came from.
Do you understand that last phone call? They took these people, they brought them someplace. They made them make these phone calls. They gave them the script to read. That's why what you heard in her voice was completely devoid of emotion. She was not happy about being forced to say this. I'm on a plane. I'm on a plane. Yeah, there's the plane. I'm on a plane. There's, she's reading that. When she said what she said that was her own, she got very emotional. When she said, "I hope to see your face again, baby," everything changed. That was from her. That wasn't read. She wasn't forced to say that. And she even had the audacity and the courage to try to speak truth in that last second, saying it's a frame or something like that. How else do you describe what you're being forced to do? Those poor people were never seen again. God knows what they did with them. But I don't think they survived. In fact, I'm sure they didn't. And that is a tragedy. I want to conclude with that, which dispels the nonsense about the phone calls and the let's roll and the CIA production of all this happy horse doo-doo. I didn't swear. I think I'm going to have a part 3 to go into Flight 93. And if you guys want to see more about the cell phone calls, Flight 93, and I'm going to have a part 3. But if you're really hot for more information and you can't wait, there's a bunch of sources where I got a lot of my information from. Okay, let me find them for you. I'm going to list them in. I'm going to list them in the video description. Thank you so much for staying with me as I navigated technical difficulties. Hopefully, this whole edit comes together fine, God willing. Thank you again. Please, as a reminder, if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. If you want to see part 3, please let me know. I will then go into whatever I have left with Flight 93 and the Pentagon, because I just had a great guest on my podcast, Adam Eisenberg, who revealed a lot of information about the Pentagon and what's been happening. I recommend you check that out. I'm going to give you a list of the documentaries and the books that I have pulled this information from. I apologize for all the clips, but I thought it was the best way to show you more of the impossible features of that day, and give you something more to think about. I will list all my sources in the video description. Much love to you, my friends. Thank you again for bearing with me. God bless you, and I will see you soon.